A vet was about to put down this paralyzed leopard when the X-ray showed something impossible. What was meant to be the end of a life suddenly revealed a shocking secret no one could explain. The animal's body held scars that weren't natural and signs of something far more sinister. In that moment, the vet realized this wasn't just about mercy. It was about uncovering a hidden truth that could change everything. But the closer she looked, the more dangerous it became. Because someone wanted this leopard gone, and they would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. What did the X-ray reveal, and why was this leopard never meant to survive? Before we begin, tell me your city or country in the comments. It turns this space from a screen into a circle of real hearts. The Montana winter pressed hard and unrelenting against the frosted windows of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. As Dr. Clara Whitford pulled her worn fleece jacket tighter around her shoulders, the small examination room felt especially cold tonight, the chill settling deep into her bones, matching the heavy weight pressing down in her heart. Before her, on the metal examination table, lay a young leopard, its once vibrant spotted coat dulled and lifeless from weeks of silent suffering. Clara's weathered hands trembled slightly as she stroked the sedated animal's broad head, her fingertips brushing across its ears with tender care. "I'm so sorry, little one," she whispered, her blue eyes clouding with tears she stubbornly refused to let fall. The leopard's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, its back legs lying completely motionless despite the gentle, encouraging touch of her careful examination. The past 7 years of running this chronically underfunded center had presented her with countless difficult decisions, nights filled with uncertainty and sacrifice, but none quite like this one. The leopard had arrived just 3 days ago, discovered abandoned in the back of a rusting truck at a lonely rest stop, barely alive and unable to move its hind legs. No papers, no tags, no explanation, just another nameless victim of the growing illegal exotic animal trade. A cruel business that seemed to grow worse and bolder every single year. Clara glanced around the examination room, taking in the peeling paint, the flickering overhead light, and the outdated equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a functioning clinic. The center's latest funding request had been denied without hesitation, leaving them scraping by on small donations, volunteers, and her own dwindling savings account. She had learned to make do with less, to stretch every dollar and every hour, but some cases required more than determination, creativity, and sheer willpower. "What happened to you?" she murmured softly, carefully examining the leopard's paralyzed lower body with both sorrow and fascination. The animal's golden eyes, though dulled and glazed from sedation, held a fierce spark of wildness that made her chest ache. Despite everything that had endured, that wild spirit, untamed and unbroken, remained alive inside. With a deep breath, Clara wheeled over the ancient X-ray machine. It groaned loudly in protest as she positioned it above the leopard's spine, the rusty hinges squealing, the sound echoing in the quiet room like a warning. This was the final step, the confirmation of what she already dreaded and suspected. Irreparable damage that would leave only one humane option. "Just hold still for me," she said softly, though the sedation ensured the leopard would not stir. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar process, the practice steps flowing from years of repetition. Muscle memory took over while her mind wrestled with what would inevitably come next. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her narrow shoulders like a physical burden she could almost feel crushing her. The machine hummed to life, its green operational light flickering twice before finally steadying. Clara held her breath, as she always did during X-rays, though she stood safely behind the protective barrier. The exposure completed with a soft click, and she moved slowly to the computer to examine the results, her pulse quickening with dread. First image appeared on her screen, and Clara leaned forward, her tired eyes squinting against the glow of the monitor. Something wasn't right. She adjusted the contrast carefully, bringing the delicate line of the spine into sharper focus. Her breath caught abruptly in her throat. "What in the world?" she whispered, leaning even closer until her forehead almost touched the glass. There, nestled clearly against the vertebrae, were distinct metallic fragments. Not random shrapnel, not old bullets, but what appeared to be precisely placed pieces of metal. Her heart began to race wildly as she took in their careful, deliberate arrangement. Clara quickly captured more angles, her fingers flying across the controls, each new image confirming her initial horrifying discovery. This wasn't injury or chance accident. This was deliberate surgical intervention. Someone had operated on this leopard, implanting foreign objects along its spine with cold technical precision. Her hands shook as she zoomed in on the images, her breath uneven. The implications made her stomach twist and churn. This wasn't just another case of animal trafficking. This was something far more sinister, darker than she had ever dared imagine. Someone had used this magnificent creature as a test subject, performing experimental surgery before discarding it like broken equipment when things went wrong. The leopard made a soft, pained sound on the table, and Clara immediately moved back to its side. She placed a gentle hand on its flank, feeling the steady rhythm of its shallow breathing. Looking into those golden eyes again, she saw something new, not merely a victim to be mercifully released from suffering, but living evidence of a crime that demanded to be exposed. "We're not giving up," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling in her mind. "Whatever they did to you, whatever they were trying to do, we're going to figure it out." The leopard's tail twitched faintly, the very first movement she had seen below its midsection since its arrival. Clara stood straight, her fatigue momentarily forgotten as a fierce sense of purpose filled her with renewed energy. This wasn't just about saving one animal anymore. The X-rays on her screen told a story of calculated cruelty, of systematic abuse carefully hidden from public view. Someone needed to be held accountable, and she had just become the only person who knew the truth. She looked down at her patient, determination replacing the earlier resignation etched across her features. "You and I are going to get to the bottom of this," she promised quietly, already mentally listing the experts, specialists, and allies she would need to consult. The leopard's eyes drifted closed, its breathing deep and steady, unaware that its X-rays had just changed absolutely everything. Clara's sharp blue eyes widened as she stared at the X-ray illuminated before her. The ghostly white image showed something impossible. Foreign metal fragments scattered along the leopard's spine, placed with deliberate precision. These weren't random pieces of shrapnel. They were surgical implants. "This can't be right," she muttered, her fingers tracing the stark white shapes on the film. Her initial shock gave way to a churning in her stomach as the implications became clear. Someone had operated on this animal, not to help it, but to harm it. Jonah Reed rushed into the examination room, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. "Dr. Whitford, I've got the..." His voice trailed off as he noticed her rigid posture. "What's wrong?" Clara gestured to the X-ray, her hand shaking slightly. "Look at this, Jonah. These aren't injury fragments. These are surgical implements. Someone deliberately put these here." Jonah stepped closer, his brown eyes narrowing as he studied the image. "But why would anyone?" His face paled as understanding dawned. "This was done on purpose? That's sick." The sedated leopard lay breathing steadily on the examination table, its spotted coat rising and falling with each breath. Clara placed a gentle hand on its head, feeling the soft fur beneath her weathered fingers. The animal was young, probably not more than 2 years old. Its golden eyes, though closed now, had held such pain when it had arrived. "We need to report this," Jonah said firmly, already reaching for his phone. "This has to be illegal. The authorities need to know." Clara let out a bitter laugh. "The authorities?" She shook her head, remembering countless unanswered calls and dismissed complaints over the years. Do you know how many times I've reported suspicious wildlife injuries? How many times I've filed paperwork about possible trafficking? They always say they'll look into it, but nothing ever happens. But this is different, Jonah protested. We have proof. Actual evidence of experimentation. Clara looked at the young man's earnest face, seeing the same idealism she'd once had. Jonah, whoever did this has money. Big money. You don't perform this kind of surgery without serious backing. She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in every movement. They'll bury this just like they bury everything else. The leopard stirred slightly, letting out a small whimper. Clara immediately checked its vital signs, her trained hands moving with practiced efficiency. The animal was stable, but its paralysis remained complete from mid-spine down. Asterisk, I was ready to euthanize, she said quietly, more to herself than to Jonah. I thought I was being merciful, ending its suffering. Her voice hardened. But this wasn't an accident or a natural injury. Someone did this deliberately, and they're probably doing it to other animals too. Jonah moved closer, his face set with determination. Then we find out who. We gather evidence. We make them listen this time. Clara stood silent for a long moment, looking at the leopard's scarred body. Every mark, every surgical trace told a story of calculated cruelty. This wasn't just about one animal anymore. It was about exposing whatever dark operation had brought it to her table. No euthanasia, she finally declared, her voice firm. Not today. This little one isn't just a victim, it's evidence. She began gathering supplies, her movements purposeful now. We're going to heal it, document everything, and find out exactly what they did and why. Jonah nodded, relief visible on his face. I'm with you, Dr. Whitford, whatever you need. Clara looked up at her assistant, seeing the loyalty and courage in his expression. This won't be easy, Jonah. Whoever did this won't want their work exposed. We'll have to be careful. I know, he replied simply, but it's the right thing to do. Clara turned back to the leopard, gently stroking its spotted coat. The animal had been through so much already, surgery, trafficking, paralysis, but there was still life in it, still a fierce will to survive. She could see it in the way it fought against the sedation, in how it responded to gentle touches despite its pain. First, we heal you, she whispered to the sleeping cat. Then we find out who did this to you. Her voice took on a steel edge. And we make sure they never do it again. This wasn't an accident, Clara whispered, her finger tracing the metallic shapes on the X-ray screen. Someone did this deliberately. Jonah leaned in closer, his broad shoulders tensing as he studied the image. Those look like surgical implants, but why would anyone? Money. Clara's voice was tight with anger. Someone's using this leopard as a test subject. They moved to examine the sedated animal on the treatment table. Under the bright medical lights, Clara's experienced hands gently parted the spotted fur, revealing a pattern of careful incisions that had healed into thin scars. Look at this, Jonah. She pointed to a tiny bump near the leopard's shoulder blade. That's a tracking device. Professional grade. Her weathered fingers found another mark behind the ear. And here, this is a manufacturer's tag. Like you'd see on livestock. Jonah's normally cheerful face darkened. We need to call the authorities, Dr. Whitford. This is serious. Clara shook her head, her tired eyes showing a flash of determination. Remember the tiger case last year? By the time the bureaucrats finished their paperwork, the evidence had vanished, along with the animal. She moved to her desk, pulling out shipping manifests and veterinary records she'd collected over the years. Her hands trembled slightly as she spread them across the counter. These patterns match, she said, pointing to similar cases. The surgical technique, the tracking methods, it's all connected. There's a network moving these animals, selling them to private collectors who want exotic pets. Jonah paced the small examination room, running his hands through his dark hair. But why the surgery? Why paralyze it? Control. Clara's voice was bitter. A paralyzed predator is easier to handle. Safer for the buyers to show off. She looked at the sleeping leopard, its chest rising and falling peacefully. They never meant for it to recover. This was intentional. Clara pulled up her contact list on her computer, reaching out to trusted colleagues across the state. Messages started coming back. Whispers of similar cases, hints of wealthy buyers, suggestions of shell companies moving animals through remote locations. Our rehabilitation center is perfect cover, she realized aloud. Rural, understaffed, easy to lose things in the paperwork. She turned to Jonah, her face set with resolve. We can't keep it here in plain sight. They'll find out we have it. What are you suggesting? Jonah asked, though his expression showed he already knew. Clara stood up straighter, years of fatigue falling away as purpose filled her. We need to move it. Tonight, somewhere safe, off the books. She saw uncertainty flash across Jonah's face. I know it's asking a lot. I'm in, he interrupted, squaring his shoulders. Whatever you need, Dr. Whitford. She allowed herself a small smile, grateful for his loyalty. They began gathering supplies, medications, monitoring equipment, transportation materials. Every few minutes, Clara checked on the leopard, her hand resting gently on its flank. We'll need to document everything, she said, photographing the scars and surgical sites. This isn't just about saving one animal anymore. This is evidence of something much bigger. As they worked, Clara felt the weight of their decision settling around them. Their small wildlife center had suddenly become ground zero in a fight against an organized trafficking ring. It wasn't the battle she'd expected when she'd started her day, but looking at the sleeping leopard, so vulnerable, so wronged, she knew they had no choice. If we report this officially, she said softly, this leopard will disappear. Either the traffickers will make sure of it, or it'll get lost in the system. Either way, the evidence vanishes, and they keep operating. Jonah nodded, already preparing. The portable equipment they'd need. So we document everything ourselves, build the case our way. It's not exactly legal, Clara warned. Neither is what they did to this animal, Jonah replied firmly. Clara checked her watch, then looked out. At the gathering dusk. They had a few hours until true dark, enough time to prepare, but not enough to second-guess their decision. The leopard would need to be moved carefully, keeping it stable and monitored. One wrong move could damage its spine further, she felt. The familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about healing an injured animal. This was about exposing a truth that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. We'll need somewhere. Isolated, she said, already mentally mapping out safe locations. Somewhere we can monitor it without being noticed. As they continued their preparations, Clara kept returning to the X-ray, studying those telling metal fragments. Each one represented a choice someone had made, to harm, to profit, to exploit. Now she was making her own choice. Not the safe choice, not the easy choice, but the right one. The Montana night pressed close around them as Clara and Jonah worked in silence. Their flashlights cast weak beams across the rehabilitation center's gravel parking lot while they prepared the truck. Every rustle of leaves made them pause, hearts pounding. Easy now, Clara murmured, more to herself than to the sedated leopard. The animal's breathing was slow and steady as they carefully lifted its transport cage. The metal was cool against her palms, slick with evening dew. Jonah's muscles strained as they slid the cage into the covered bed of his pickup truck. Dr. Whitford, Jonah whispered, are you absolutely sure about this? His brown eyes were wide with concern in the dim light. Once we do this, there's no going back. Clara secured the last strap holding the cage in place. "We're already past that point, Jonah. The moment we found those implants, we became responsible." She checked the leopard's vital signs one final time through the cage bars. "If we report this officially, it'll disappear into the system. Or, worse." They climbed into the truck cab, and Jonah turned the key. The engine's rumble seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. Clara clutched a folder of medical records and shipping documents to her chest, evidence. They couldn't risk leaving behind. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as they pulled onto the empty highway. Their sanctuary contact was waiting. 4 hours north, deep in the mountains where the Leopard could recover safely hidden. Clara watched the familiar landscape slip past, trying to quiet the voice in her head that whispered this was madness. 2 hours into their drive, on a stretch of road where pine forests pressed close on both sides, Clara noticed headlights in the rear-view mirror. "How long has that car been behind us?" Jonah checked his mirrors. "A while now, maybe 20 minutes?" The vehicle was gaining on them quickly, too quickly. Clara's hands tightened on the folder. "Speed up a little, let's see if they pass." Instead of passing, the car surged forward until it was right on their bumper, high beams blazing. Jonah's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "Dr. Whitford, keep driving," she said firmly. "Just keep." The car swerved into the oncoming lane and accelerated alongside them. A deep voice bellowed through their open windows. "Pull over, now." Clara caught a glimpse of cold gray eyes and a hard face before the other vehicle slammed sideways into them. Jonah fought the wheel as their truck skidded toward the shoulder. The Leopard's cage rattled in the back. "Hold on!" Jonah shouted. He managed to straighten out, but their pursuer struck again. Metal screamed against metal. The truck spun, tires losing grip on loose gravel. Clara's head struck the window as they slid to a stop, half in the ditch. Before she could clear her vision, a car door slammed and heavy footsteps approached. A massive figure loomed outside Jonah's window. "Out, both of you." Clara's heart hammered as they complied. The man was tall and powerfully built, with scarred knuckles and eyes like steel. He held himself with the confidence of someone used to violence. "Marcus Duval," he said, his tone almost conversational. "And you have something that doesn't belong to you. The Leopard?" Clara stepped forward, pushing down her fear. "It belongs to itself, not to whoever mutilated it." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Brave words from someone in your position, Dr. Whitford. Yes, we know who you are. Just like we know about your little rehabilitation center and your assistant here." He glanced at Jonah. "It would be a shame if anything happened to either." "You can't threaten us," Jonah said, but his voice shook slightly. "I'm not threatening." Marcus took a step closer. "I'm explaining reality. That animal is worth more money than you'll see in a lifetime. Hand it over, forget what you saw, and everyone goes home happy." Clara thought of the X-rays, the cruel metal implants, the suffering in the Leopard's eyes. No. Marcus moved so fast she barely saw it. Suddenly, Jonah was on his knees, gasping as Marcus twisted his arm behind his back. "Last chance, doctor. The cat, or your friend's arm." Then his legs, then the Leopard's roar split the night. Though sedated, the commotion had roused it enough to voice its fury. Marcus's head turned instinctively toward the sound. Clara seized her chance, snatching the folder from the truck cab and hurling it at his face. Pages scattered like startled birds. Jonah wrenched free and stumbled toward her. They dove into the truck as Marcus cursed it behind them. The engine roared to life. Gravel sprayed as Jonah reversed, then sent them lurching forward onto the road. Gunshots cracked through the air. Clara ducked as the rear window shattered. But they were already accelerating into the darkness, Marcus's headlights falling behind. "Are you hurt?" Clara gasped, checking Jonah as he drove. "Just bruised." His voice was shaky. "Dr. Whitford. They know who we are. They know everything. Clara nodded, her whole body trembling with fading adrenaline. The night's events had transformed an abstract threat into terrifying reality. They were no longer just trying to save an animal. They were fighting people who would stop at nothing to protect their profits. The sanctuary's medical bay hummed with fluorescent lights as Clara dabbed antiseptic on Jonah's forehead. He winced, but managed a weak smile. Their narrow escape from Marcus had left them shaken but determined. "Hold still," Clara instructed, cleaning a shallow cut above his eyebrow. "That was too close back there." "I'm fine," Jonah insisted, though his usual energy was dampened. "How's our patient doing?" Clara glanced at the leopard, sedated and peaceful. On the examination table, the big cat's spotted coat rose and fell with steady breaths. "Stable, but I want to do another scan. Something's been bothering me about those X-rays." The sanctuary's equipment was leagues better than what they had. At their small center, Clara wheeled over the portable scanning unit, her weathered hands steady despite her exhaustion. The screen flickered to life, revealing layers of tissue and bone. "There," she muttered, leaning closer. "Jonah, do you see that?" He stood carefully, moving beside her. "That bright spot, what is it?" "A microchip." Clara's blue eyes narrowed. "But it's not a standard ID chip, it's something else entirely." Working quickly, she grabbed a handheld reader from the counter. The device beeped as she passed it over the leopard's shoulder blade. Numbers and data scrolled across the small screen. "Oh my God," Clara whispered. Her hands began to shake. "This isn't just any leopard. Look at these genetic markers." Jonah peered at the readout. "What does it mean?" "Remember the Bengal leopard that disappeared from the wild 5 years ago? The one they called the Ghost of Gujarat?" Clara's voice was thick with emotion. "This is her cub. They must have captured the mother while she was pregnant or just after giving birth." The implications hit them both. The Ghost of Gujarat had been famous among conservationists, one of the last truly wild leopards with unaltered genetics, before widespread interbreeding with released captive populations had diluted the gene pool. "So this little one," Jonah gestured to their sleeping patient, "carries some of the last pure wild genes of the species." Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "That's why they experimented on it. They're probably trying to find ways to control and breed these genetics to corner the market on authentic wild leopards." The leopard stirred slightly, and Clara moved to check its vitals. As she stroked its fur, she noticed things she'd missed before, the particular rosette pattern that matched archived photos of the ghost, the distinctive ear markings that had made the mother so recognizable. "We can't let them have it back," Jonah said firmly. "This isn't just about saving one animal anymore." Clara nodded, her fatigue replaced by fresh resolve. "This could affect the entire species' future. If we can protect these genetics, maintain this bloodline." She trailed off, the possibilities expanding before her. The medical bay fell quiet except for the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Clara continued her examination, documenting everything about their precious charge. Every scar told a story of the trafficking ring's cruelty, but now she also saw the legacy of the wild in the powerful muscles, the perfect adaptations that generations of natural selection had refined. "We'll need to move again," she said finally. "Once Marcus reports back to his bosses about what happened on the road, they'll figure out where went. And now we know why they won't give up easily." Jonah touched his bandaged forehead gingerly. "Whatever you need, Dr. Whitford. I'm in this for the long haul." Clara smiled at her assistant's unwavering loyalty, even as worry gnawed at her. The stakes had grown far beyond what she'd imagined when she first saw those metal fragments in the leopard's spine. This wasn't just about justice for one victim anymore. It was about the future of an entire species. She checked the leopard's medication levels one more time, her mind already racing with plans. They would need help, connections, a network of people they could trust. The trafficking ring had resources and reach, but Clara had something they couldn't buy: the fierce determination to protect this precious link to the wild world that was disappearing too fast. The leopard's whiskers in its sleep, and Clara wondered if somewhere in its cells, in the genetic memory passed down from its mother, it remembered the free and fierce creature it was meant to be. Clara's hands trembled as she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Rick Martinez speaking." "Rick, it's Clara Whitford." The silence on the other end was heavy. Clara could almost see the former ranger's weathered face tightening with suspicion. Their last encounter 3 years ago had ended in heated words over his refusal to investigate suspicious wildlife deaths. "What do you want, Whitford?" His voice was cold, defensive. "I need your help, Rick. I have evidence, real evidence this time, of organized wildlife trafficking. And it's bigger than anything we imagined." She heard him exhale sharply. "Last time you had evidence, it was circumstantial. Cost me weeks of wasted time. This is different," Clara pressed. "I have a living leopard with surgical implants, foreign metal fragments, documentation, and now people are trying to kill us to keep it quiet." The mention of violence caught his attention. Clara described their encounter with Marcus, watching the sedated leopard's chest rise and fall in the sanctuary's recovery room as she spoke. "Send me what you have," Rick finally said. His tone had shifted from dismissal to cautious interest. Clara's next call was even harder. Sarah Chun, the investigative journalist who had once mocked Clara's concerns in print, answered with professional detachment. "Dr. Whitford, this is unexpected. I know we've had our differences," Clara began, "but I have a story you need to see. One with proof this time." "The last story you brought me nearly damaged my credibility," Sarah reminded her sharply. "Come to the sanctuary," Clara insisted. "See for yourself. I have X-rays, documentation, and a surgically altered leopard that's part of a vital bloodline. This isn't just about animal abuse, it's about genetic manipulation and species survival." There was a pause. "You have 1 hour of my time. That's it." Within 2 hours, both Rick and Sarah stood in the sanctuary's medical bay, their faces grave as they examined the evidence. Rick's ranger training showed as he methodically photographed the surgical scars and metal fragments visible in the X-rays. Sarah's quick fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, her earlier skepticism replaced by focused intensity. "These surgical techniques," Rick muttered. "They're sophisticated. Military grade," Sarah nodded. "And these shipping manifests, they're forgeries, but professional ones. This operation has serious backing." Clara watched them work, relief mixing with anxiety. "So you believe me?" Rick straightened, his face hardened by years of seeing too much corruption go unchallenged. "Yeah, we believe you. But believing isn't enough. These people, they're organized, well-funded. They'll have contingencies. I've got contacts in international media," Sarah added, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "And sources in wildlife protection agencies. We'll need them all." Just then, Jonah burst into the room, his face pale. "Clara, you need to see this." He held up his phone, showing the news alert. A small wildlife center 2 counties over had burned down overnight. The article mentioned missing documentation and destroyed computer systems. "Marcus," Clara whispered. "They're erasing their tracks." Rick's jaw tightened. "They're moving fast. We need to move faster. I can have a preliminary story ready in 48 hours, Sarah said, already typing. "But we'll need protection before it goes live." Clara looked at her unlikely allies, the disillusioned ranger, the once skeptical journalist, and her faithful assistant. Each brought something essential: Rick's law enforcement experience and connections, Sarah's investigative skills, and media reach, Jonah's unwavering support. "We need to split up the evidence," Rick advised. Different locations, different formats. Make it impossible to destroy it all at once. I have a secure cloud server, Sarah offered. And contacts who can safeguard physical copies. Clara nodded, feeling both stronger and more vulnerable with each passing moment. The weight of her private crusade was now shared, but that brought its own dangers. Every person in this room was now a potential target. We work in parallel, she decided. Sarah, start your investigation. Rick, we need legal protection and law enforcement contacts we can trust. Jonah and I will focus on keeping the leopard alive and stable. It's not just evidence. It's a living creature that deserves a chance. As they divided tasks and exchanged contact information, Clara felt the shift in the air. Her lonely fight had transformed into something larger, more powerful, but also more complicated. Each new ally brought hope and resources, but also increased the stakes. Marcus and his syndicate would fight back harder now, knowing more people were involved. The leopard stirred slightly in its enclosure, its breathing steady but labored. Clara watched it, remembering how close she'd come to euthanizing it just days ago. Now it represented not just one life to save, but a chance to expose and stop a system that treated magnificent creatures as commodities to be exploited. Whatever happens, she told her new allies, we need to move quickly and carefully. These people have already shown they're willing to kill to keep their secrets. The others nodded grimly, understanding the gravity of what they were undertaking. Their alliance was fragile, but essential, each person bringing crucial pieces to a dangerous puzzle. As they dispersed to begin their tasks, Clara felt both hope and fear tightening in her chest. The real battle was just beginning. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary's gravel driveway as Clara loaded the last of their evidence files into her truck. Her newfound allies Rick Martinez, the former ranger, and Sarah Chun, the investigative journalist, were due to arrive any minute to review their findings. The leopard's genetic data could expose years of illegal trafficking operations. Jonah appeared at her side, his familiar presence reassuring. Everything's packed. The leopard's stable this morning actually took some food. Clara managed a small smile. First time in days. Maybe where the sharp crack of gunfire cut through the morning stillness. Clara's truck exploded in a burst of flame and smoke, sending her and Jonah diving for cover behind a concrete barrier. Heat scorched her face as burning papers scattered through the air, their evidence disappearing in flames and ash. Stay down, Jonah shouted, but Clara was already scrambling toward the sanctuary's main building. The leopard was in there, vulnerable and alone. More shots rang out. Marcus Duval emerged from behind the burning truck, flanked by two men she didn't recognize. His cold gray eyes found her instantly. Should have stuck to fixing broken birds. Dr. Whitford. Jonah lunged forward, trying to give Clara cover to reach the building. One of Marcus's men swung a heavy metal pipe, catching Jonah in the ribs with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground with a cry of pain that turned Clara's blood to ice. Jonah! She started toward him, but Marcus's bullet struck the ground. At her feet. Next one won't miss, Marcus said, his voice eerily calm. Inside, now. Let's see this miracle cat of yours. Clara's heart hammered as they forced her through the sanctuary's doors. The leopard was hidden in a back recovery room. But each step closer felt like a betrayal. Behind her, Marcus's men dragged a groaning Jonah along. The sanctuary's main examination room still smelled of antiseptic and fear. Clara's hands shook as she fumbled with her keys, buying precious seconds. The morning's hope had shattered into sharp-edged despair. Open it, Marcus commanded, pressing his gun against Jonah's temple. Or your loyal puppy here gets put down. Clara's fingers trembled as she unlocked the door. The leopard lay curled in its enclosure, golden eyes watching them warily. Its spotted coat couldn't hide how thin it remained, how fragile despite their weeks of care. Marcus smiled without warmth. Quite the specimen. Worth all this trouble, wouldn't you say? He nodded to one of his men. Trinket, we're taking it with us. You can't, Clara protested, her voice breaking. The surgery they did moving. It could kill it. Not my problem. Marcus's gray eyes fixed on her. You should have stayed out of this, doctor. Some animals aren't meant to be saved. A groan from Jonah drew her attention. He was pale, one arm wrapped protectively around his ribs, but his eyes held the same fierce loyalty she'd always seen in them. Now that loyalty had gotten him hurt, maybe killed, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. One of Marcus's men had knocked over a tray of medical instruments, sending them clattering across the floor. In that split second of distraction, Jonah threw himself at Marcus's legs. Chaos erupted. A gun went off, the shot going wide. Clara dove for the leopard's enclosure as Marcus kicked Jonah away. She had to protect the animal, had to save something from this disaster, but Marcus was faster. His boot caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. She hit the floor hard, watching helplessly as his men wrestled the struggling leopard into a transport crate. Load it up, Marcus ordered. He looked down at Clara with something like pity. Next time you see something you shouldn't, Dr. Whitford, keep your mouth shut. They left her there, sprawled on the cold floor beside Jonah's battered form. Outside, an engine roared to life. Her truck still burned, filling the air with acrid smoke. With it went their evidence, their hope of exposing the truth. Clara crawled to Jonah's side, tears blurring her vision as she checked his injuries. His breathing was shallow, face twisted in pain. I'm so sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. Jonah's fingers weakly gripped hers. Not your fault, had to try. But the weight of failure crushed her chest. She dragged Jonah into this fight, put his life at risk. The leopard was gone, probably to die in transport or disappear into some collector's private menagerie. All their evidence was ash, and her allies would arrive to find only wreckage. Clara slumped against the wall, the taste of defeat bitter in her mouth. She'd thought she could make a difference, thought she could stand against the darkness that turned living creatures into commodities. Instead, she'd only proven how powerless she truly was. The morning sun continued to rise outside, indifferent to the devastation it illuminated. Clara held Jonah's hand, listening to his labored breathing, and wondered how she could have been so foolish to think she was strong enough for this fight. Clara sat in the dim light of her office, her weathered hands pressed against her temples. The events of the past day replayed mercilessly in her mind. The ambush, the scattered files, and worst of all, Jonah lying in the hospital with a concussion. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Through the window she could see the leopard's enclosure, now reinforced after Marcus's attack. The young cat lay still, its spotted coat catching the morning light. Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. She had promised to save this creature, but now everything seemed to be falling apart. Get it together, Whitford, she whispered to herself, her voice rough with exhaustion. Standing up, she grabbed her medical kit and headed to the enclosure. If nothing else, she could at least check on her patient Dot as she approached. The leopard's golden eyes tracked her movement. There was something different in its gaze today, a spark that hadn't been there before. Clara knelt beside the cage, speaking softly as she always did. Hey there, beautiful. Let's see how you're doing today. She began her examination, carefully checking the surgical sites and testing muscle responses. Then something extraordinary happened. As she touched the leopard's hind leg, it twitched. Not just a reflex, but a deliberate movement. Oh my God, Clara breathed. She repeated the stimulus, and again, the leg responded. Her heart began to race. Working quickly, she documented everything, her hands shaking with excitement. For the next hour, she worked with the leopard, using techniques she'd developed over years of rehabilitation work. Simple exercises, gentle stretches, careful manipulation of the limbs. The leopard remained calm throughout, those intelligent eyes fixed on her face. By mid-morning, Clara had developed a new therapy plan. She called Rick Martinez, who arrived, still sporting bruises from yesterday's confrontation. "Look at this," she said, demonstrating the leg movement. Rick's tired expression lifted slightly. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "That's something, isn't it?" "It's more than something," Clara replied, her voice growing stronger. "It's proof. Proof that whatever they did to this animal wasn't complete. Proof that we can fight back." She led Rick to her office, where Sarah Chun, the investigative journalist, was already waiting. Sarah's laptop showed multiple tabs of research. Shipping manifests, veterinary licenses, property records. "The auction," Clara said, spreading out a map on her desk. "That's where we'll catch them." "Clara," Sarah started, her expression concerned. "After what happened yesterday." "Yesterday showed us exactly what we're dealing with," Clara interrupted. "But it also showed us something else. Marcus destroyed evidence because he's scared. They're vulnerable." Rick leaned forward, his ranger instincts engaging. "The underground. Exotic animal trade works on a strict schedule. They're planning something big. We've seen the signs. And now we have proof of their surgical experiments," Clara added, gesturing to her medical files. "With the leopard showing improvement, we can demonstrate their intent. This wasn't just trafficking. It was deliberate manipulation of an endangered species." Sarah began typing rapidly. "I've traced some of their shell companies. There's a pattern to their movements. If we're right about the auction, the three of them worked through the morning, plotting and planning." Clara felt energy returning to her tired body. The despair that had threatened to overwhelm her was transforming into something else, determination. Around noon, she returned to check on the leopard. To her amazement, it had managed to pull itself into a sitting position. The movement was awkward and clearly difficult, but it was there. Clara pressed her hand against the cage, tears flowing freely now, but these were different tears. The leopard watched her, its resilience kindling an answering fire in her heart. "You're not giving up," she whispered. "So neither am I." Back in her office, Clara faced her allies. Her voice was steady as she laid out their plan to infiltrate the auction. It would be dangerous, perhaps even more dangerous than anything they'd attempted so far. But now they had something they hadn't had before: hope. "We need to move fast," she explained. "The leopard's recovery is our window. Once we expose their operation, they won't be able to hide behind their money or their threats." Rick nodded slowly, his experience showing in his careful consideration. "We'll need backup. People we can trust. I have contacts in 3 major newspapers," Sarah added. "Once we have concrete evidence, they'll run the story." Clara looked at the map again, at the red circle marking their target. She thought of Jonah in his hospital bed, of the leopard fighting to move again, of all the animals that had suffered under the syndicate's cruelty. "We're not just fighting for one leopard anymore," she said quietly. "We're fighting for everything. This represents the right of these creatures to live free from exploitation, the truth about what's being done to them." The leopard's cry echoed from outside, stronger than before, full of life and determination. Clara smiled, feeling the last traces of her despair fall away. They had work to do, and this time they would not fail. Clara adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, her heart pounding beneath the elegant blazer she'd borrowed for the infiltration. The underground auction hall buzzed with the quiet conversations of society's elite, their champagne glasses tinkling as they browsed the merchandise. Dozens of exotic animals in cages, draped with velvet cloths. Her hands trembled slightly as she pretended to study the auction catalog. Around her, men in expensive suits and women dripping with jewels moved from cage to cage, speaking in hushed, excited tones about their potential purchases. The air was thick with perfume and the musk of captured wildlife. Lot number 17. A rare specimen indeed, a nearby attendant announced, lifting a cloth to reveal a cage containing a terrified snow leopard cub. Clara's stomach churned. She touched the hidden camera button on her brooch, knowing her allies were recording everything from their surveillance van outside. The former ranger, positioned as a security guard near the entrance, gave her an imperceptible nod. Then she saw him, Marcus Duval, moving through the crowd like a shark in dark waters. His gray eyes scanned the room methodically, and Clara turned away, pressing deeper into a cluster of potential buyers. Her pulse quickened as she remembered Jonah lying in that hospital bed, his face bruised from Marcus's attack. The main auction was about to begin. Wealthy collectors took their seats in plush chairs arranged in a semicircle. Clara chose a spot near the back, close to where her leopard's cage waited behind a heavy curtain, lot number 23. She had insisted the animal be included. Tonight, knowing the syndicate wouldn't resist showing off their successful experiment. As the auctioneer took the podium, Marcus's gaze swept past her again. This time, he paused. Clara saw the moment of recognition flash across his face, his eyes narrowing dangerously. She kept her expression neutral, but her fingers clenched around the catalog. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer began, "welcome to this exclusive evening." Marcus was already moving toward her, his scarred hands flexing at his sides. Clara stood slowly, deliberately, her voice rising above the auctioneer's practiced patter. "These animals were stolen," she called out, ripping off her scarf. "They've been surgically mutilated for profit." The room erupted in startled murmurs. Marcus lunged forward, but Clara was already backing toward the curtain. With one swift movement, she yanked it aside, revealing the leopard's cage. "This animal was paralyzed through illegal experimentation," she continued, her voice stronger. "Now, they've been harvesting rare genetics, destroying protected species." Marcus reached for her, his face contorted with rage. But something extraordinary happened. The leopard, which everyone had assumed was still partially paralyzed, suddenly sprang up with newfound strength. Its powerful paw shot through the cage bars, catching Marcus's sleeve and throwing him off balance. The crowd scattered in panic. Clara's allies burst into action, the former ranger moving to block the exits, the journalist team streaming in with cameras rolling. The leopard continued to snarl and swipe, creating chaos that prevented Marcus or his men from reaching Clara. "The authorities have been notified," the journalist announced, her voice carrying over the commotion. "Every cage, every transaction, every piece of evidence is being broadcast live." Marcus tried to rally his security team, but the wealthy buyers were already fleeing, their carefully maintained anonymity shattered. Several turned on the syndicate immediately, offering testimonies in exchange for immunity. Clara stood her ground as police sirens wailed in the distance. The leopard had settled into a watchful crouch, its golden eyes fixed on Marcus with predatory focus. Those eyes no longer showed weakness or fear. They blazed with the same determination Clara felt in her own heart. "It's over, Marcus," she said quietly as officers flooded the hall. The truth was always going to come out. He lunged one last time, desperate and reckless. But the leopard's warning roar stopped him cold, and police officers quickly surrounded him. As they led him away in handcuffs, Clara caught a glimpse of his face, the cold calculation, finally replaced by something like defeat. The next hour passed in a blur of police statements and media cameras. Clara moved from cage to cage, working with animal control to document each creature's condition. But she kept returning to the leopard, whose unexpected display of strength had turned the tide of the entire operation. "You never stopped fighting," she whispered to the magnificent animal. "Neither did I." The leopard's golden eyes met hers with that same fierce intelligence that had first captured her heart weeks ago. In that moment, Clara knew that every risk, every moment of doubt, every confrontation had been worth it. The truth was exposed. The syndicate was falling apart, and most importantly, these animals would finally have a chance at the life they deserved. The morning sun painted Montana's sky in shades of gold and pink as police lights flashed across the auction house's elegant facade. Clara Whitford stood quietly to the side, watching as officers led Marcus Duval away in handcuffs. His cold gray eyes met hers for a moment, but the intimidation that had once chilled her to the bone now felt powerless against her resolve. "You did it, Dr. Whitford," said Detective Sarah Martinez, approaching with a thick folder of evidence. "The ring's completely exposed. We've already identified connections to trafficking operations in 3 countries. Clara nodded, but her attention was drawn to the steady stream of cages being carefully removed from the building. Each contained a story of suffering. Each represented a life that would now have a chance. Her hands, weathered from years of caring for injured wildlife, fidgeted with her jacket sleeve. "What happens to them now?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "They're being distributed to sanctuaries across the country," Martinez replied. "And yes, your center will receive additional funding to help with rehabilitation efforts. The FBI is making it a priority." The vindication felt surreal. For years, Clara had fought against bureaucratic walls and dismissive authorities. Now those same institutions were scrambling to help. She thought of Jonah, still recovering in the hospital, and made a mental note to share the news with him first. 3 weeks later, Clara stood before a different audience. The sanctuary's observation deck overlooked a sprawling natural enclosure, where tall grass swayed in the morning breeze. Behind her, a small group of journalists and wildlife officials waited expectantly, but Clara's attention was fixed on the transport cage beside her. Inside, the leopard that had started it all lay quietly, its golden eyes alert and focused. The surgical scars had healed, leaving silver traces through its spotted coat. Those marks would always remain, like the memories of their shared journey. You ready?" she whispered to the leopard, her voice carrying all the emotion of their months-long fight. Clara knelt beside the cage door, her movements deliberate and calm. As she unlocked it, she remembered the night she'd first seen those metal fragments in the X-ray, the moment that had transformed her from a tired veterinarian into someone who would stand against an entire criminal empire. The leopard moved cautiously at first. Its steps were still uneven, a permanent reminder of the experimental surgery it had endured. But there was strength in its movements now, a far cry from the paralyzed creature that had nearly been euthanized on her table. Everyone held their breath as the leopard emerged fully from the cage. It paused, surveying its new territory. The morning sun caught its coat, highlighting the powerful muscles that had recovered through months of patient rehabilitation. Clara felt tears welling in her eyes as the leopard took its first steps into freedom. Each movement was a victory, each forward stride a testament to survival. The cat moved slowly at first, then with growing confidence, its natural instincts awakening to the open space before it. "There you go," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You made it." The leopard paused once more, turning to look back at her. In that moment, Clara saw everything they had fought for, not just the survival of one animal, but a blow struck against the cruelty of trafficking itself. The cat's golden eyes held hers for a heartbeat, a connection between healer and healed, fighter and survivor. Then, with fluid grace, the leopard moved into the tall grass. Its spotted coat blended perfectly with the dappled shadows until only its movement gave away its position. Clara watched as it explored further, each step taking it closer to the life it was always meant to have. The officials behind her were talking about statistics and success rates, about funding and future operations. But Clara barely heard them. Her transformation wasn't measured in headlines or arrest records. It lived in the steady steps of a leopard walking free, in the knowledge that she had found strength. She never knew she possessed Dot as the leopard disappeared into its new territory. Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer the exhausted caretaker, struggling alone against overwhelming odds. She had become something more, someone who had learned to fight, to stand, to never back down when justice and compassion demanded action. The morning light strengthened, warming her face as she watched the grass where the leopard had vanished. One life saved, one wrong righted. It wasn't the end of her fight. There would always be more animals needing protection, more battles to be fought. But now she knew, with unshakable certainty, that she was ready for whatever came next. Dot in the distance, the leopard spotted. Form briefly appeared on a rocky outcrop, proud and free, before melting once again into the landscape of its new home. Clara smiled, knowing that some victories weren't meant to be captured in headlines. They lived instead in moments like this, in scarred but healing bodies, in recovered freedom, and in the quiet triumph of refusing to look away when others suffered. If this story warmed you tonight, subscribe and leave a single line that stayed with you. Your words shape tomorrow's story.